Welcome to Graduated, where we talk mindset and money with the goal to help each other level up in life. Today, we are doing a dream sheet, which is a plan to make sure we are being intentional about what we want in life. I'm LaShawn, and I'm speaking with Paris, age 22, who is in New York. Paris, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me on. How are you?
I'm fantastic. We're going to have a great conversation. It is Sunday, last Sunday of 2021. Before we kick off, how was 2021 for you? Thumbs up, sideways, or thumbs down?
2021, it was sideways, I'd say. Doing a full school year, senior year of college during quarantine was very difficult, obviously. But all things considered, I managed to graduate, managed to somehow write a full thesis, and I was very lucky. I managed to get a job very soon after graduating. So uh, despite all the hustle and struggle, it's been all right.
Congratulations on graduation. That's fantastic. And absolutely, there's a bunch of drama going on. I think if any of us are navigating this, we should give ourselves a hand clap. And tell me a bit more about what did you study in college and what are you going to be doing in this new job?
I was at Skidmore College with majoring in political science with a minor in French, and just started work with Pen America, which is a human rights literary nonprofit based in New York. Most of my work is centered around free expression and education, so working with college campuses, students, high school students, faculty, and navigating freedom of speech in the academic space. So it's very exciting, very hard work, especially given all the crisis around education and what books are quote unquote allowed within the US. It's a very fraught time in that area of study, but I'm really enjoying what I'm doing and it's making it very exciting.
That's great. Now, I'm not super educated in this area. I won't even say I'm a little bit educated. So you're going to have to break it down for me. When we talk about what books are not allowed in the US or in a specific academic institution, give me an example of something that is contentious and how you help think through the solution to defending free speech and whatever the other side of that argument may be.
So right now, obviously, there's been celebrations of banned book weeks for books that have been traditionally banned, things like To Kill a Mockingbird and other such books. But if we're looking at contemporary times, especially right now, there has been a pushback specifically from people who are very against critical race theory and the things that it's aiming to educate people on, where a lot of parents usually right now it's happening in a lot of Midwestern states, are pushing back against books that are written specifically by people of color and by queer people as well. So, really, it's not necessarily a fight against a type of knowledge, rather, it's a pushback against who is allowed to create knowledge that is accessible. And obviously, given who is being targeted with these current book bans, it's very clear that it's an identity issue right now, and that it's always been difficult in the US if you're looking at identity and who is allowed to speak up, who is censored. And so the current issues are definitely very scary. And what we've been doing at my organization is trying to push back against these book bans because obviously it's a very big problem. And we've been trying to tap into student bases in school districts where these books are being banned, mostly because with teachers and librarians, actual faculty in the schools, many who have tried to push back against the bans are either threatened with losing their jobs or actually have lost their jobs. And so right now, students really have the least to lose, but the most to gain by pushing back against these bans. And that's who we've been focusing our efforts on.
That's fantastic. And how do you measure success? How do you know if something's working, not working? What's the unit of measure and what's the time horizon?
Obviously, we can't. There have been instances of success where students have successfully pushed back against bans in their school districts and it's been overturned. But it's increasingly becoming an issue where these book bans are being upheld mostly because of the fear that people have over one, losing their jobs, and the people who are pro the book bans usually hold a lot of sway in their communities as well. So measuring success has been a little bit difficult. I think In my opinion, one of the ways we are measuring success on this is just getting the word out, because in a lot of these school districts, it's happening so silently, where books that marginalized people can see themselves represented in are being taken off the shelves and no one is noticing. So raising awareness for this issue, making sure people are aware that this is happening. Because when people think book banning, nobody ever wants to think the United States, because we have this whole idea of the US is very pro free speech. Anybody can say whatever they want. And so no one is really focusing on the fact that this is happening here. So getting the word out is one measure of success. Getting students to also feel like they're not alone in this fight. Recently, we held a teach-in. We brought a couple of authors whose books had been banned. We had authors like Neil Gaiman and George M. Johnson come and speak to the students and talk about what the banning of the books, the impact that has had on authors who are being banned. We had student activists come in and talk about their experiences. And we had a turnout of about 400 students who came to this event and left feeling very empowered and ready to go out and do the work in their own communities. And for me, that is a measure of success, making students feel like they have sway, they are able to make change in their communities.
That's fantastic. Now, even in that short articulation, you've brought me up to speed on something that I understand a bit about, but then when you anchored it in the books, that was especially in the, I don't know, is this just universities? That's, I guess, where my brain went. But do you think about this in K through 12 as well?
It's mostly happening in K through 12, actually.
Okay. Yep.
Universities are a bit of a different space since a lot of them are private. So they really get to decide what they want to do in their own bubble. It's a different case when you move to state-owned schools. But right now with the book bans, a lot of this is happening in K through 12. And unfortunately, it's now starting to spread to public libraries as well. And then you have to think of what the impact is for kids in low-income communities who public libraries are their only access to pick up a book where they see themselves represented. Because if you're looking at a wealthier community, a kid who comes home and says, oh, this book got taken off the shelf, the parent could just be like, oh, I'll get you your own personal copy. But what about kids who don't have that access?
Yeah, totally. So two things there. First off, as these students, and thanks for the correction, are largely minors, is there anything special you have to do as you're trying to educate and not necessarily activate, but to provide them with the tools so they can go be changes or voices in their community? Is there anything you have to do differently because you're interacting and engaging with people who are under 18 in many cases?
Yes, because this is something that we actually were discussing how to navigate, especially if you find that you have a student who is very willing and eager to participate in this kind of action, but there is pushback from their parents. So say you have a student whose parent is one of the ones seeking for a book to be banned, but they want to take some kind of action. How do you navigate around the parent when this student is a minor? That's definitely something that we're still working on, how to properly go through these channels. Luckily, a lot of the students we have worked with, especially if you're looking at media releases and these students being in the public eye, have been seniors in high school or recently graduated. So they have some kind of autonomy, but it's definitely something that we are thinking about moving forward when we're trying to reach younger students. I don't have a super clear answer on how we will be navigating that yet, but it's definitely something we've been thinking about.
Totally makes sense. And the second part of my question was, how do you leverage digital tools, TikTok videos or Discord channels or other types of things to really meet this student population where they already spend time?
That's definitely a good question, because as we all know, everything is very digitized and online right now. So we've been doing a lot of social media pushes, mostly through the communications department at the organization. And there are some student groups that we have a really good connection with already, and through them, we get to other students. So they are sending out text chains, email blasts, posts on social media, and other things like that. We've been tapping into, Pen America has really good connections with a lot of big name authors and celebrity status folks. And so we've been tapping into that celebrity factor to try and get students to be more aware and come to our events a bit more. But yes, being online is definitely a way to reach students. But then the other factor of being online is how do we protect students in an age where you can't really censor the internet, but you have to make sure that, especially as minors, that they are staying safe and that you're not opening these students up to harassment. So one of the things we've been conducting, one of my coworkers has been conducting digital and online safety workshops that students can attend. She has done specific ones catered to LGBTQ plus students, to students of color, depending on identity and background. She's been doing workshops on and training students and young people on how to be safe online. But again, to answer your question, yes, we have been reaching into the online space because that's really where students are right now.
And the last question on this, and I'll give you the context on why I'm interested in this. As you think about the digitization of media, we're decades into this at this point, so it's not new, but it's increasingly, that someone will read something in electronic form over printed form. As you talk about these books, is there a difference in how you think about the bans and other types of censorship that's happening on a book that's printed, that's in a school, versus a book that is distributed in some electronic format that a student might read on their Chromebook or something? Like how do you look at the difference between the medium and how the book is actually distributed to the student?
That's a really good question. And honestly, I think there is very little difference. If you're looking at the kind of like school issued Chromebooks, the school can still control what you look up, what things websites you have access to, and things like that. It's very, even in my own experience as going to high school in the US, the kind of Chromebooks we had, you could only go on a very limited range of websites that had already been vetted by the administration of the school. So censorship is definitely still happening in the digital space as well. In fact, during the research we've been doing on the digital space and how this book bans can be affected with things like e-readers, online reading, and things like that. There have been reports where students have mentioned that the schools that have been a part of have blocked certain websites, things that have resources for students of color or LGBTQ plus students, where websites that they usually go to access tips on and like things that might aid them in their day-to-day lives. Those websites have been blocked by the schools. So censorship is still happening for students online. And another thing that we've been looking at work is within the carceral system in the United States, where people who are in prisons in the US are given e-readers. In some prisons, they're given e-readers to use as opposed to having a physical library. But on these e-readers, they only have access to a very specific set of books, which has been chosen by the prison admin system. So even for people who are in the carceral system and have these online reading capabilities, there is still censorship as to what they can or cannot access. So definitely the digital space is censored as well. And somehow I feel like as we become more digitized and move online in a greater capacity, the online space has more capability of being censored than physical books, if that makes sense.
Totally. And it's great to expand that beyond a single type of institution. So the schools are one area, the prison system is another. As you think about the organizational level for a school, is it the school? Is it the school district? Is it the county or the state? What's the right level to look at where the control point is for this particular issue?
With looking at the K through 12 system, the control point is definitely at the district level. So you're looking at who's on the school board, who the superintendents of the districts are, because they're really obviously they get funding from the federal government or the state government, but once those funds hit the school, it's up to the school board and the people at the district level who decide how things are handled on a school district basis. Obviously, there are definitely things that you have to teach as come down from the state. I might be wrong, but I do believe that a lot of the minute things, the smaller issues, which really aren't small if you're looking at things like book bans, those are in the hands of the school district.
And so that school board, you're saying, wields a lot of this power. How is that typically managed? Is that something where people run for a position on the school board? They get elected or voted in? Do they get assigned? Does anybody get paid? What's the term? Give me just the basic structure of somebody who's on a school board.
The school board runs on an election basis. So for a lot of them, I think depending on how long you're allowed to be on the school board, they run along the same cycle as like county or town elections. So when you're voting for like the town sheriff, you're also voting for members of the school board. And more often than not, it tends to be parents of students who are already at the school. So this is why it's becoming a very big issue, wherein you have a parent who's very against a certain subset of books, who has a position on the board that already gives them a very strong position of sway and ability to pull whatever they want off the shelves. So I don't know if there's a better way to choose who gets on the board, because there is definitely benefit to having parents on a school board. It just so happens that in this case right now, it's a negative side effect. That's generally how it goes.
All right. And then is there a list of what books or websites matter?
So one of the things we found during our research is there's a Facebook group circulating somewhere where all these parents from various school districts are logging on and like sharing what books they think need to be banned at this point in time. It's very much like a witch hunt, but for literature. It's a literature witch hunt right now. That's how it's happening. There are lists circulating somewhere where a bunch of books have been listed as quote unquote should be banned. And then underneath there's reasons. Parents are saying, this is why I don't want this book on the shelves. I don't know if they have publicized any of these. We've managed to track and find some of them based off of like the research we have done. But there's definitely lists circulating. And the one common factor among all of these is they are written by people of color. And those books specifically are being labeled as quote unquote divisive content. And then when you look at books written by queer people, those are being labeled as pornographic content. And again, it's just a witch hunt against marginalized communities and trying to restrict who does or does not get a voice in schools.
That's great to educate me. So thank you for that. And that's the context. We're going to transition into your questions. When I speak with someone, I love to hear about where they're passionate and experienced around, because these are areas that are going to be the unlocks for you to go optimize your personal finance journey. And it may not seem like those are super connected, or maybe to you it does seem more obvious, but this really helps anchor in something that's not so abstract. There's generic information that we all should do, right? It's save 20 to 30% of your money if you can, if not, at least 10 to 15%. Don't spend impulse purchases, invest in ETF or low load mutual funds, max out your 401k, or equivalent retirement asset, get an IRA. These are all things that we know. Mm-hmm. Those are hygiene things you need to go do. Really what it comes down to, though, is like, how do you create a step function or create leverage so that you have access to more capital so you can accelerate that journey and not have to go work someplace for 30 years to maybe get to the right place. And who knows, along that journey, there could be health issues or family needs or other responsibilities that throw you off track. And so I really appreciate you providing some context on your background and where you're focused right now. And who knows how that evolves over the course of your career, but it's a fantastic anchor that is rooted in a purpose that is easy to understand and articulate. Well, at least you articulate it very well. So thank you. But it helps us have a more structured conversation about some of the questions. And that's a good segue to two of the questions that you shared. The first was, how do I start accumulating wealth instead of just money? And how do I make my money do more than just sit in a savings account? All right. So tell me why that set of questions is top of mind for you.
That question is top of mind for me because in all the things I've been reading, even if you're looking at who holds wealth, and when I say wealth, it doesn't mean just like your ability to go spend a ton of money on a material thing or just immediately go buy something expensive, I feel like I'm talking about generational wealth. And if you're looking at who's historically had that and why those reasons are, obviously, as a person of color myself, that kind of knowledge has been closed off. Even more so as an immigrant to the US, as a child of the diaspora, I feel like that's not really something we have discussed really well. Generational wealth has historically been a very white thing. And I feel like we've hit a point where we're trying to learn how can we expand knowledge of wealth? How do we become wealthy more so than just rich, if that makes sense? Because anybody can have money, but like what kind of financial legacy do you want to leave behind is something that we really need to discuss. How do you make your money expound rather than just have a lot in a single moment in time? How do you make sure that your generational line after you is set not only in this is what I have in my bank account that's going to pass to them, how are they going to keep growing and like making sure that we have a financially fulfilled family line? I don't know if that makes sense. The questions are coming to mind.
Yeah. Well, I'll repeat some of those fundamentals that I sped through just a few moments ago. And you likely know these, but I think that's a good starting point. And then I'll share a few more specific points for you to consider. But on some of these foundational elements, there's a great book called The Index Card, and it was written by a professor who ended up having to take care of his sister's child, who was an adult, but had some physical challenges. And it really had him thinking about his financial future. And so him and a peer, they wrote this book called The Index Card. And the punchline to this book is that almost all of the core personal financial advice you need can be written on a single index card. And the paraphrasing of that has a set of rules. And I'll go through these quickly. First off, you want to try to save 10 to 20% of your income. And that addresses both your emergency fund, your short-term savings, and your long-term savings. Number two, you want to pay off your credit card balances in full every month. Don't let that carry over. It's not just about paying those down, but it's also about forcing yourself into a process to question, why are you spending that money in the first place? And many times we use credit cards for not just our basic expenses, but for things that we really shouldn't be buying if we are trying to optimize our financial impact. Number three, max out your 401k and any other tax advantage savings accounts that you have access to, IRAs and other types of things. Number four, avoid buying and selling individual stocks. And so right now, there's a ton of conversations around apps like Robinhood, and people are saying like, oh, I got the hot tip and you should buy such and such, or sell's going to go up. Roblox is going to go up, such and such is about to. There's all these things that folks are saying, and it doesn't mean you can't find short-term success, but mathematically, you will not beat the bots and the quant traders. And the quant traders are folks who are using software at hedge funds and other large trading institutions. And this is what they do for a living. And they're using automation and fairly complicated statistical and other types of models to compete against you. And the game is rigged. And so you should avoid thinking you're smarter than the aggregate market and try not to buy or sell individual stocks unless you really want to invest and get sophisticated. Number five, and this is the counter to if I don't buy stocks, what do I do? Is to buy inexpensive, diversified ETFs or mutual funds. And so in the previous point, it was avoid buying individual stocks. And instead, you can still buy stocks, but you want to buy inexpensive. And what that means is no load or low load. And the load is basically the cost that a company is going to charge you from taking a bundle or a collection of stocks and finding how to distribute your risk across those various stock positions. So you don't have to do that, but you don't want to pay somebody 2-3% of your base capital every year to provide that service. And so there's some great ETFs, or at least some popular ones that folks use. Vanguard has one of the popular inexpensive ETFs. And an ETF is an exchange traded fund. And again, it's just a bundle of other stocks. And Vanguard is, I think, a great place to start if you're like, which ETF should I get? They have some very popular and well-vetted ETFs. And the great thing there is all you have to do is set up that Vanguard account. And you can buy Vanguard not just through Vanguard. You can open up any stock trading account and you can purchase Vanguard stock or the Vanguard ETF. They have more than one ETF, so you have to look at, read a few details. But it's not complicated at all, very simple. And so whether you have a Ameritrade, a Schwab, a E-Trade, like any of these types of accounts, you can go and purchase a Vanguard ETF, or you can open your account directly with them. The next rule is if you ever get a financial advisor, you want them to legally sign what's called the Fiduciary Standard. And so this is an agreement that says anytime a financial advisor gives you advice, they should only give you advice that is in your best interest and not because they're going to make extra commission or they're going to make some additional type of payoff for them individually or for their company. And if someone breaks that fiduciary standard, they can go to jail. It's illegal. And so if you have a financial advisor who is not willing to sign that and provide a signed copy of that, then you just need to stay away from them because that's not someone who has your best interest at heart. The next item is to buy a home when you are financially ready. Sometimes people rush in and they don't realize in addition to the mortgage and the interest, the obvious things, you have sometimes extra insurance. It's usually baked into your mortgage payment, but you have your property insurance, these other types of things. Those are obvious. But when you look at all the utilities, different counties, different cities, you are paying for water, sewage, trash, all the maintenance. Your gutters have to get cleaned. Your windows have to get cleaned. All these things that are both for aesthetics and for the basic maintenance and upkeep of the home, it's expensive. And to your earlier point, a lot of generational wealth has been blocked from many individuals because they couldn't start their journey with home ownership. And so home ownership is super important, or at least has been for the last few decades, as a key indicator on helping folks unlock that. But it doesn't come without other considerations. And so moving into that home ownership in a smart way is really important. And I would add on to that is, as you progress, try to figure out how to think about deleveraged home ownership. This is something that I think in communities of color and other places, we don't talk enough about. And delevered home ownership is about really owning your home. And that's always has an asterisk, because even if you had a home that you owned with no mortgage on it, you still have to pay property taxes to the government. And if you don't, they'll come take your home. So do you ever really own any of this property? ? But a delevered home means that you don't own any money to the bank. And that really gives anyone a lot of flexibility. And I challenge individuals who think they want to own a home. If you live in a really expensive place, let's say Los Angeles, and you're going to pay $800,000, $700,000 for a small home that's not amazing. If you really are connected to LA for work reasons, family reasons, you just love the lifestyle or the weather, fantastic. That's the cost to live there and buy a home. If you move to a city like Rochester, New York, it's not going to be LA, but you can find very affordable homes there. You can find a home there for $100,000, $125,000, and you could actually pay that home off. And so that's just something to consider. And then last two things here is buy insurance to make sure you're protected. And that is not just your basic car insurance, home insurance. There can be liability insurance so that if someone sues you for some malicious reason, you have coverage. It may mean other types of insurance, whether that's term life. You don't really need to think about whole life insurance in most cases. And term life is a way to make sure you can get insurance there. But you can buy insurance for your business ideas. You can buy insurance for disability, that if you got hurt on work, that you can buy extra insurance there. And it's not about willy-nilly just buying a bunch of insurance, but you want to make sure you're protecting the assets you're building. And then finally, think about everything you're doing for yourself and figure out what you want to do to support others and their social safety net. So that's a lot that I just went through really quickly, but hopefully that's a good kind of anchor. I'd love to hear from you. What in that list spoke to you as something that maybe you already knew, but you're really trying to embrace and lean into?
So thank you. You just dropped a lot of facts, a lot of things that I don't personally. I know the names, but I might not necessarily know what they mean. Things like with the buying stocks, I do have friends who are rushing to buy stocks on Robinhood, and I just never ventured into that because it's not necessarily something I know enough about, which again is another issue. Like, why are these not things that we are taught in like high school or even in college? Why is this knowledge that's not public, if that makes sense? um but definitely the home ownership is something that I have thought about, and I know definitely a symbol of it's a symbol of some type of wealth, owning a home. Then that makes me like then think about, oh, so I have to like definitively decide where I want to settle down. And I just feel at the point I'm at in my career, I'm in a very fluid state. So then comes the question of how do I have the equivalent of that without actually buying, like committing and buying a home someplace. And even with the all the other things you mentioned with finding a financial advisor, all these are things that I'm not really sure how to take the first step towards. Like, how do I do this? And I'll definitely be looking into the book that you mentioned, the index card. It's definitely, I think it's something that would be very useful to me. But honestly, I'm not even sure how much I can say on all these topics just because I know so little. A lot of what you just said, I'm not even sure if to say if like this is an embarrassing fact, but it's these are things that I didn't really know about, and it's definitely something that I have to go back and educate myself.
Yeah, and yeah, it's definitely not something to feel weird about. And that's why we have these conversations, right? It's about sharing information and to challenge the sources, right? So I'm one anecdote, one data point that you can look to get some ideas. But, and number two is many times advice is dangerous because we don't bring the right context to it. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking through some of these areas, but my personal journey, my values, my time horizon, many things could be true in my context. But if I simply give them to you and you try to repeat them as a checklist, it may not give you the results that you want. And so it's also important for us to try to understand the context of some of the information that we're gathering to determine if it's going to be applicable and how we want to apply it. But absolutely, there's a set of foundational knowledge that we all should have. And I would bring it back to our earlier part of this conversation on some of the books that are being banned right now are clearly targeting authors and topics that intersect with marginalized communities based on race or sexual orientation or other types of groups included in that. And I'm not saying it's the same level of kind of importance, but included in what's being banned is financial literacy. And I would argue financial literacy was banned from schools a long time ago. And we just never had the conversation on how that's impacting the lives of so many people who are resigned to being poor or to being working class when they may want to have bigger aspirations, but they don't know how to navigate it. And as I listen to you talk about some of the tactics that people have used to suppress information and not share knowledge, I would say that financial literacy is in that same category. And in many cases, I would argue it is intentional. You can't have an industrialized workforce that is truly empowered if they don't think like employees. And this is, there's a book, I don't know if you ever ran across it, it's called The Protestants Ethic. It's pretty dense and it's an old book, so I don't recommend you rush out and go buy it. But one of the core things it does is talk about how at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, we needed a way to move these agricultural farmers to work in factories. And one of the things that was done was to look at Christians and Christianity, which had a large intersection, obviously, in the US, many Christians who were also farmers, and to leverage our self-worth, our identities with our work. And so a lot of times if you go to a networking event or you meet a new group, someone new in your group of friends, someone won't say, hey, Paris, tell me what makes you happy. Or, hey, what brings you joy in life? That's not typically something someone will say at like a dinner or a cocktail party. I actually use those questions sometimes because I find them very fulfilling. But many times what we say, hey, how you doing? What do you do? Right? And it's the first thing we want to know about somebody is what do they do? And that's a weird thing. And my point is we've been really conditioned to think that part of our worth is tied to the work that we do. And it doesn't mean that's not true or that's a bad thing, but we should be careful not allowing someone else to effectively layer on their process, their constraints to make sure we're the people building the widgets for some company. And we really can make that decision with intention. And so if you want to go get a job at a corporation, at a nonprofit, work in politics, like whatever you want to do, go for it, but do it with intention and understand that some of these systems are actually designed not necessarily to keep us poor, but to really have a glass ceiling so we never quite break through. And financial literacy is really a key unlock to having a new set of options for us to consider.
Yes, I definitely agree, especially with generally everything that you've said. Financial literacy it's being banned in schools. I think I remember only one elective in high school that focused on, it was a teacher who taught criminal and personal law, and half of the semester was focused on how to buy a house, how to and a lease for a car, things that you do need to know as you're leaving high school, things that are small skills, how to budget, things that are definitely very relevant. It was so tucked away in the class selection list. It was poorly advertised. You only knew about it if you knew a friend that had taken this class. And so it makes you wonder why things like that are not mandatory in the same way that a health or a math class would be. And it definitely needs to be. And I think I do agree with your point that it's part of the capitalist scheme to constantly have a subset of employees, like people who will always be ready to work. And it's definitely very true. It's unfortunate. And even with how we're all so conditioned to always be looking at what does somebody else do, it's definitely very true. I recently moved to DC for work. I'm up in New York for the holidays, but I live in DC now. And everyone you meet, even the way we self-identify, a lot of people, when they introduce themselves to you, they'll self-label as young professionals, as their first thing that you should know about them. And then immediately move on to, what do you do? Where do you work? What sector are you in? And it's become a very defining factor, even in simple interactions that should be simple. And I'd argue that it's made it very difficult to make meaningful relationships as young people who are out of the college bubble, because either you're always trying to one up somebody or every interaction is a networking opportunity, which networking isn't bad, but should that necessarily be the whole focal point of every interaction you have? And then again, why is that? Why are we constantly climbing for some kind of financial one-up? Who benefits from having had either family or relatives who were, for lack of a better word, financially capable, and how has that knowledge benefited them in a way that those of us who might not have had that are lacking? So it's definitely a lot of questions around financial literacy.
Absolutely. And I love that you are focused in a space where sharing knowledge is really critical, because you can get the importance and the value of getting this, not just for yourself, but making sure that along your journey, you can share what you're learning with others. In addition to some of those steps from the index cards framework that I'd share, is it's helpful to think long term. There's a lot of conversations online. If you're on TikTok or IG, there's some random person who's going to teach you the latest side hustle where you can earn passive income. You're going to drop ship on Amazon. You're going to trade these stocks. I make $400 a day. I can show you how. Mostly nonsense. And I think one of the things we really have to embrace is that the real path is to try to get rich slow. And when you really think long term, you have the ability to unlock some of the real advantages that the system is making available to us, at least in the US. And its core, if you look at most individuals who break through, and you talked and anchored your question about how do you accumulate, wealth and not just have enough money to get by. The concise articulation for most individuals who have figured that out is they start a business, they use that cash from that business to buy real estate. And it's not more complicated than that. And not everybody is going to be an entrepreneur. Not everybody is going to work in a business that's high growth enough that throws off enough cash for this to be true. But if you just look at the pattern of folks who have been most successful at creating generational wealth, typically I'm not just talking about someone who buys a house and then that helps fund education for the next generation. That's fantastic. I'm not calling that generational wealth. I'm calling that the baseline. We should all aspire to at least get to that point. But if we talk about folks who really have created generational wealth, there is a process where they start a business, they have either cash being thrown off on a monthly or quarterly basis, or they have a liquidation event and that business gets acquired, and they use the cash from that business to buy real estate, cash flowing real estate. And that real estate has, in the US, again, I'm using that as my anchor, but there's a lot of parallels in other countries as well. There's many tax benefits in owning real estate. And so not only can it pay you, but it can shield you from your number one expense as an employee, which is your taxes. In most cases, people spend more on their taxes than almost anything else. Sometimes your mortgage might be in competition. Many people are paying 20, 25%. The upper bound in the US is 37% federal tax. In certain states, when you load up all the federal tax plus the state and city taxes, you could be paying almost 50% of every dollar you make. And so real estate comes with all sorts of ways to give you money and have tax rates that can get in the single digits, and in some cases, zero. And maybe that's a different conversation on rebooting the tax code, but that's the way it works. And so I think that's something to think about is that a path for you? Start a business, use the cash from the business to acquiring cash flowing real estate. And the reason I started this conversation with, tell me more about what you're up to now that you've graduated and you're in the workforce focused on this particular space, it can be helpful to say, all right, over time, what are the businesses that make sense? And you asked, that was your second question. How do you move from working just for someone to working for yourself? I would almost evolve that question a bit, because there is a difference between working in a business that you own versus owning a business that generates revenue. And it doesn't mean you can't work in the latter, but you should, again, if the goal is generational wealth, you should look at building a business that can work when you're not working. And that may mean that you need to be the founder, you need to be the base, and you need to do a number of things to get it going. But you want to create a system where you can pull yourself away and the business keeps making money. And the super quick flow I would walk you through on how to think about that is, number one, find your why. Like, why do you care about a certain customer and their problem? And again, it doesn't have to be what you do in your current day job, but it sounds like you're very passionate and knowledgeable about this. And if I'm just freestyling, I'm just making up, this could be a horrible idea. But imagine, there was a startup that you founded that said, hey, we're going to track some of the books or websites that are under attack from marginalized groups, from other things that are really suppressing knowledge in America or whatever country you wanted to focus on. And we're going to provide a real-time list of school districts that are banning these books. We're going to provide visibility on who's on the school board when they're up for re-election, who you can elect as a counter proposal, and people could go to this site to have the convenience of taking action to really attack this issue. And you'd have to think about like monetization. People aren't going to pay for a subscription to this necessarily, but there might be other ways that you can monetize. Might be other sponsors or kind of corporate interests that are actually trying to push to keep these types of texts in circulation. And so, again, there's work to be done. These businesses are never going to be easy, but that's just a random brainstorm that says, like, how could you take your knowledge, expertise, and passion and do that Venn diagram that you might have seen? Is you take what you're happy or what makes you happy, you take what you're great at, and you take what the market values, And the overlap of those three circles gives you a way to, generate wealth. And once you can figure out your why, then I would say in today's world, thinking like a modern person, you want to build an online community around that why. And that could be an Instagram account, it could be a Discord community, it could be any way that makes sense for you. And then once you go build that community, and that could take time, it could be months or even sometimes a year or two to really start to get traction there. Then you build your product. So you don't build your product before you build your customer base. You go figure out where your people are and you try to get them aggregated. And then you use them you create value to them in the short term, but you use them to learn what the pain points are. But once you have them built and you've built your product, then you activate that community. And then you want to finally run your business with the same level of rigor that you would as if you were an employee. And that means having annual calendars, have 2 and 3 year planning cycles, to have an annual operating plan, to have quarterly planning, to have a weekly, monthly, quarterly check-ins to make sure your goals are being optimized properly, to be able to recruit amazing people to come work for you. You have to be a great motivator to own a business that's going to work when you're not around. You want to be a great manager and coach and leader, and you want to constantly be telling your story, your personal story, your business story, to your customers, to your employees, to your potential employees, to people who will never be your employees, but you want to inspire in your communities, to potential investors, to anyone who needs to get on the train with you to where you are headed. All these things are requisite, and it's hard. That's why many people will resign themselves to just saying, well, I'll just be an employee. And there's nothing wrong with that. But back to the earlier point, if the goal is generational wealth, there are very few people who have figured out how to do that as an employee. And so finding your why, building a base of customers, executing a product at quality, and then running your business the same way you would as if you were an employee. To me, those are some of the ingredients on how you can find success. It doesn't guarantee it, but it's going to put you in the 90 plus percentile of possibility. And to me, that's super exciting. And that's a whirlwind of things to think about, but hopefully there's some nuggets in there that are useful for you.
Yes, thank you very much. And I do agree that it's very difficult to form lasting generational wealth if you are still an employee. I have friends who are in the finance sector, and they're always talking about, I'd like to retire by 30 and just have money accumulating without me physically going into work. And obviously that's very ideal. And I think in some way for myself specifically, I've always thought of that as for people who are in the business sector. I think a very common thing with people who work in the nonprofit area is a resignation of that kind of money is not for the career path I have chosen. Do you think once we start figuring out ways to create wealth, regardless of the career path that you're in, then you can start generating generational wealth?
Absolutely. Well, and I would also argue that if someone says, hey, I want to retire at 30, not have to work, it means, number one, they're probably doing work they don't really enjoy. And so that is a good indication that they're probably doing the wrong thing. But number two is, at a certain point, if you're living, a life of leisure and you have, nothing to do, you will get bored sitting on a beach. You will need to go do something. And you may be able to stay on a vacation lifestyle for 3 months or a year, 2 years, whatever the number is. At some point, you'll have to do something productive. And I think what many people are trying to break up with is the idea that on a forced schedule, or I have to always go to this building or this particular Zoom chat, or I have to always follow this set of rules. There's something in that work that they don't enjoy. But believe if we're really tapping into our passions, maybe someone wants to be an artist instead of an investment banker. Maybe somebody wants to be a furniture maker instead of an accountant. There are many things that we may want to do instead that don't necessarily have the same constraints as working a job, but we would still want to do it if we had our livelihood supported. And I think that's the distinction. That what are you excited about that you would work as hard as you would for a job, even if you made no money? And then is there a way to decouple your financial foundation from that work? And so if you want to be a stand-up comedian or you want to be a furniture maker and you don't really make a ton of money on that, but you show up like giving that your all, I think those are the folks who can potentially be most transformative on the planet, because they are going to give all of their energy same way somebody else might give that energy to a company who's just going to use them up.
Definitely, for sure. And obviously, like the ideal would be to find something that you do enjoy, that, like you said, you can wake up every day and give your all to, but also that will give you something that will generate some form of wealth in return as well. And it's definitely doable. I think it's very much possible. It's just a matter of figuring out where to start, I think, is the hardest part. Like, how do I get myself going? How do I start off? Especially if some of these things, I feel like if you have um, no wealth to begin with, if you're starting from zero, it can seem like very difficult and very daunting. And I'm like just wondering, people who have nothing at the beginning, how do you like then monetize something you're enjoying to give you something?
Right. Well, I think a couple things for you will be less abstract here to consider is one, get your appropriate level of comfort with the vocabulary and all these foundational concepts. And whether that's watching YouTube videos or reading books or speaking to people, maybe it's a combination, reminding yourself that not everything you read, even if it sounds right or good, is going to be accurate or applicable for you, but just go on that intellectual journey where you can use your critical thinking skills and your curiosity, get educated on the basics. And it's not a ton of time, but that is required. And number two is to treat this journey the same way you might think about nutrition or fitness. If someone says, how do you have the best body for your genetic, predisposition? It's pretty straightforward. You have to eat right and you have to have some type of physical exercise on a consistent basis. And that consistency of doing it every day is really the key. If I say, hey, I work out one day every 3 months, one day a quarter, I can't expect to be in good shape. I say, I eat really healthy one day a month, I can't expect to be in good shape. I think similarly, if you say, I manage my personal finances one day a quarter, one day a month, you can't expect to be in good financial shape. You have to, iterate. It doesn't mean you have to make that your life, but you need to do a few minutes consistently. And for some people, that means like 5-10 minutes every day they spend time around being more thoughtful. And it's that consistent iteration and application of your skills in that space, which gets you to a place where you're in good financial shape, the same way you would be in good physical shape. And so I think those are two things to consider, is just find your comfort level with the vocabulary and the concepts. And then number two, find the cadence to be consistent, and you're going to unlock it. And if you see these before and after pictures of someone who went and worked out and really transformed their bodies in week 2 or week 6 or week 8, you typically don't see a ton of change. But when they're like a year later, 2 years later, it's like dramatic. And it's the same principle in finance. It's all compounding interest, because the second day or the second month or the second year that you're on this journey, not only do you get that little bit that you did that day, but you're still retaining the benefits for all the things you had done in the previous moments where you woke up and committed to this journey. And I think that's really the key to success in a lot of things that we want to do. And it definitely applies to our financial journey.
Yes, definitely. Consistency is key. It's about finding like that pace. It's definitely something I need to get into, like consistently educating myself.
Yeah, we all have to work on that. As we're wrapping up, I have a question I like to ask, and time horizon, time value of money is an interesting topic as we talk about concepts you want to really think about. $1 today is not worth the same as $1 tomorrow, and you want to conceptually understand those types of things. But to think about time, because our time is finite on the planet, and we want to have the best experiences, hopefully the best relationships, the best moments, an aggregate of like, wow, my journey is amazing. And so as we're wrapping up, the question I would ask you is a form of a question that I like to ask others. And it's really to help us fast forward and figure out where are we at on articulating what we think we want out of this journey. And that allows us to work back from there to make sure that we are doing what sets us up to get that. And so in this role play scenario, you're gonna pretend to be yourself. So I want you to imagine that you're at a celebration for your 70th birthday party, 70. And it's like a big rambunctious room if you want it. It can be a ton of people or a small group of people if you want it. It could be really fancy and bougie and all high end, or it could be very down to earth and like whatever the visual is. You're in a room full of your people, your friends and family, and tension gets drawn. Someone says, Harris, I'd like you to stand up, share what you're most proud of accomplishing or experiencing in your life up to that point at your 70th birthday party. What do you hope you'll be able to say?
Difficult question. I struggle with looking so far ahead. I think by the time I turn 70, I want to have created something that it has created an impact on people's lives. That somebody can come up to me and say, Chris, this and this that you did, it really transformed my life, and this is how. And there's physical, tangible evidence of how I have transformed not just one person, but multiple people's lives. By, I don't know, creating multiple jobs or creating products that like offers some kind of solution to something. I think that's what I'll be proudest of, is where if I can see a tangible impact that I've made.
Fantastic. And go along that journey. We don't have to have it all perfect. It doesn't have to be planned out. I do think that the more we think about what we want, if we can't fully articulate how it might show up, we're going to change over the course of our journey. You're going to tweak things. You're going to have new priorities. You're going to learn something new and get excited about that. And all of that's okay. But ultimately, we as humans don't do a great job of getting what we want when we don't have a plan. And so give yourself permission to change your plan anytime you like is a fantastic rule, but having no plan is a fully thumbs down, 100%. So hopefully this conversation has been helpful for you as you're wrapping up this year and thinking about 2022, to just have these conversations to get my brain thinking as well. But hopefully this has been giving you some food for thought as you prioritize how you spend your time, who you connect with, and how do you maximize your potential moving into 2022. And I'm excited for folks like yourself working in the spaces that you're in, where you're also trying to spread knowledge, not just for yourself, but for future generations.
So much for your time. Thank you for having me. It's been very timely, I think, especially that it's coming at the end of the year, moving into the new year, thinking about what things I want to change. This has been a very useful, very timely conversation. Thank you.
Wise, and do it big in 2022, Paris. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.